Welcome to another deep dive. Today, our mission is to uncover the invisible translation systems that are just constantly running beneath our everyday conversations. We are pulling from a really fascinating stack of theoretical research for this one.
Yeah, we've got quite the stack today.
Right. So we're looking at specifically a recent paper on institutional semantics known as the TR-01 thesis. And then there's a sociological framework called the LMOS structural observation model.
Right, and also a systems theory text covering the MCP dynamic stability model.
Exactly. So our goal is to synthesize these three frameworks to answer a question that, frankly, affects all of you listening right now. Like, why does communication constantly break down, even when everyone is using the exact same vocabulary?
It's such a grounded issue, honestly. Like, despite how academic those papers sound, they're all just tackling this incredibly relatable problem.
Yeah, and it's the perfect hook for this, because we constantly fall into this trap. I mean, we assume that because we're sharing the same strings of text, the same perfectly spelled words, we're automatically sharing the same meaning.
Right, we think of a communication breakdown as, like, a typo or, a dropped cell phone signal.
Yes, a clear mechanical error. But the reality of how we interact at work or with our local governments and increasingly with AI, it shows us that you can have a conversation with zero typos and complete chaos still ensues.
And the research refers to this as the problem of invisible friction. We're completely missing the structural reality of how words actually travel.
So let's ground this in a scenario for everyone. Think about the last time you were in like a major project meeting at work. Someone outruns a new directive and they ask the room, does everyone get it?
Oh, yeah, the classic meeting question.
Right. And someone pipes up and says, I understand, or, I'll handle it. And everyone nods. You've achieved consensus. The meeting adjourns.
Everyone's happy.
Exactly. But according to the TR-01 thesis, the moment that meeting breaks up is where the mystery actually begins. Because like a week later, that solid agreement completely falls apart. People are doing totally different things, deadlines are missed, and everyone is just frustrated.
Yeah, so the TR-01 thesis argues that this happens because our fundamental definition of the word translation is flawed. Like when we hear the word translation, we almost always picture language conversion.
Like English to Japanese.
Exactly, or Spanish to Arabic. But structurally, translation is actually environment conversion.
Environment conversion.
Yeah. It is the transformation of meaning as it enters a new operational context, or what the researchers call an execution environment.
Okay, an execution environment. I want to make sure I'm wrapping my head around that. Are we talking about the physical place the words are spoken, like the boardroom?
No, not the physical space. It's the structural system receiving the words. So let's trace that exact phrase from your meeting scenario, right? The phrase, I understand.
Okay.
When a human colleague hears you say, I understand, they process that input through a human execution environment. And in that specific context, those words signal empathy.
Oh, I see.
They signal mental comprehension. Your colleague feels heard and validated.
Right, it creates an emotional connection. Like the human environment processes it as relational.
Exactly. But now, take that exact same string of text, I understand, and feed it into an organization's execution environment.
Okay, like what kind of organization?
Let's say a hospital's administrative intake system, or maybe a corporate IT ticketing platform. To an organization, I understand, carries zero emotional weight.
Right, the ticketing system doesn't care about your feelings.
Exactly. It operates purely as a trigger for a workflow. It means liability has been accepted, an intake process has commenced, and resources have to be allocated.
Wow, so it's a completely different reaction to the exact same input.
It is, and we can take it even further. Feed, I understand, into a legal or administrative institution.
Oh, like court system.
Yeah, a court system strips away both the empathy and the workflow. To a legal framework, that phrase is merely a recorded fact. I mean, it might have absolutely no legal effect whatsoever unless it's accompanied by, a notarized signature on a very specific dotted line.
I'm suddenly picturing this like computer software.
Okay.
Well, it's like writing a piece of code. If I write a script, it might run perfectly on an Apple computer. But if I take that exact same file with the exact same text and try to run it on a Windows machine, it's going to throw an error or crash entirely.
That's a great way to put it.
Right, because the text isn't broken. The code didn't suddenly develop a typo. The underlying operating system, the execution environment, simply reads and executes those inputs according to an entirely different set of rules.
And that analogy holds up beautifully under the TR-01 framework. I mean, the fundamental danger we face every day is that we don't realize we are interacting with different operating systems.
Right, we just assume everyone's running macOS.
Exactly. We walk out of that project meeting assuming that because everyone heard the audio of the phrase, "I understand," everyone installed the exact same meaning. We are completely blind to the environment conversion that happens the second we stop talking.
Which naturally makes me think about the newest and maybe most confusing operating system we've introduced into our daily lives.
Generative AI.
Yes, generative AI.
Yeah.
Because it really feels like artificial intelligence is causing this communication confusion to just skyrocket. People are pouring their hearts out to chatbots like they are empathetic humans.
Which they are definitely not.
Right. Or they're relying on them to generate legally binding contracts, and the results are incredibly messy.
Yeah, the common narrative is that AI introduced a totally new bug into human communication. But if we look at the LMOS structural observation model, which is the second source in our stack, the sociologists behind it make a really compelling counterargument.
Which is?
That generative AI didn't create this communication problem, it merely acted as a catalyst. It's exposing the translation layers that human beings were already navigating.
Exposing them. I'm not sure I follow. Didn't AI introduce a whole new way of generating text that we've just never dealt with before?
It introduced new text generation, yes, but it exposed our existing flaws in meaning transfer. So the LMOS observation model breaks human communication down into three distinct layers. There is the N layer, the I layer, and the OS layer.
Okay, let's define those for everyone. N layer stands for narrative.
Yes, the narrative layer. This is the surface, the literal words, the corporate slogans, the official company announcements.
Okay, got it.
And then on the other end, you have the OS layer, the operational system. These are the actual tangible mechanisms that move reality, like the budget allocations, the hiring algorithms, the legal contracts.
So we have the words we say on top at the N layer, and the actual mechanisms of reality on the bottom at the OS layer.
Precisely. But sandwiched right in between the N layer and the OS layer is the I layer, the internal layer.
The I layer, okay.
Yeah, and this is the messy, invisible space where human values, historical trauma, unspoken assumptions, and cultural context all live.
So this is where the heavy lifting actually happens. Because if my boss says to me, take care of that client, the narrative layer is incredibly vague. It's just take care of them. But I use my I layer to fill in all those blanks.
You fill in the context?
Right. I know my boss's history. I know the company culture. I know if take care of them means sending them a really nice gift basket or quietly canceling their contract.
And that internal translation is what keeps human institutions functioning. Historically, we have patched over terrible, vague N-layer communication by relying on a shared I layer.
We just sort of get it as humans.
Right. We use human intuition to bridge the gap between vague words and concrete operations. But this is exactly where AI disrupts the model, because AI largely interacts with the N layer, the surface text, and outputs directly to the OS layer, the literal command execution.
Wait, so it entirely lacks an I layer?
It has absolutely no I layer.
Because it doesn't have human trauma or cultural intuition or, memory of the unspoken office politics.
Exactly. It only has mathematical probability. So when we feed our vague N-layer instructions into an AI, expecting it to intuitively bridge the gap and know what take care of the client means in our specific cultural context, the system fails.
Oh, wow. So an AI gives us a bizarre or totally tone-deaf response. It's basically just acting like a giant highlighter over the exact spots where our human communication was already deeply flawed.
Yes.
We were just relying on invisible human labor to quietly fix the gaps.
Right. It forces us to confront the empty spaces between our operating systems.
But wait, if AI is stripping away that I layer and taking our words so literally to cross these environments, where does all that lost human intent actually go?
That's the big question.
Right, because it doesn't just vanish into thin air. If an intent leaves my mouth but doesn't make it into the administrative system, what happens to it?
Well, the LMOS framework labels that phenomenon translation loss. And you're completely right to ask where it goes, because it doesn't just quietly evaporate. As meaning moves between different execution environments, say, from a frustrated citizen speaking at a town hall to a city planner's intake form to an automated zoning algorithm, the meaning is structurally altered.
Okay, give me a sense of how that alteration works in practice?
Sure. Imagine a citizen reporting a dangerous, recurring pothole in their neighborhood. To the citizen, the meaning is deeply emotional, right? It's, my children are in danger.
Right, that's the human execution environment.
Exactly. But when that complaint hits the city planner's desk, the emotional context is dropped entirely because a bureaucratic system has no data field for fear.
Oh man, so it just becomes a number.
Yeah, it becomes a Category 3 maintenance request,
Yeah.
and then that request is fed into a municipal scheduling algorithm. The algorithm strips away the neighborhood context entirely and just reads the physical dimensions of the whole.
So it ranks it as what, like a spatial data point?
Exactly, a low-priority spatial data point compared to, say, a main highway.
That is wild. The core human meaning gets shaved off at every single checkpoint.
While arbitrary new parameters like the label Category 3 are added simply because the receiving system requires them to function.
Right.
So the original intent is just completely hollowed out, and the danger here is that this loss accumulates silently. I mean, the citizen still thinks the city heard, my children are in danger, while the city algorithm is happily processing a low-priority spatial data point.
And because everyone is looking at the same initial n-layer text, the submitted complaint, nobody realizes the translation loss has actually occurred until the road collapses.
Exactly. And this silent accumulation generates what the researchers call shear. They borrow the term from geology where tectonic plates grind against each other.
Oh, like an earthquake building up.
Right. In a societal or organizational structure, shear is the friction generated by differences in speed and processing. You have the narrative speed, how fast people are expressing their needs, grinding against the operational speed, how the institutional systems actually process that meaning.
And that friction builds up at the boundaries. The text calls them membranes, right?
Yes, the membrane is the exact point of translation. It's the boundary between two different corporate departments, or the boundary between a patient and the healthcare billing system.
Or the boundary between a human user and a generative AI.
Exactly. That is where all the structural tension gathers.
I think this is a profound reframe for anyone listening.
Right.
Just think about your daily life and the frictions you run into.
Oh, they're everywhere.
Right. The DMV losing your paperwork, or the marketing department completely misunderstanding the engineering team's brief, or even just that bizarre fight you got into on a neighborhood app. We are so conditioned to blame those moments on individual malice or pure incompetence.
Right. We think, my coworker is actively trying to sabotage me.
Exactly. But looking through this lens, it's rarely malice. It's the invisible, silent accumulation of translation loss. It's tectonic shear at the membrane of your differing operating systems.
And shifting to that structural view fundamentally changes how you approach problem solving, because you stop hunting for a villain and you start examining the mechanics of the translation itself.
Which brings me to a really obvious question, I think. If translation loss and this geological shear are causing all this societal friction, shouldn't our ultimate goal be to eliminate it?
You would think so.
Right, shouldn't we be trying to build a perfectly synchronized company or a perfectly synced society where every single word has a rigid, universally agreed upon definition? Just a system with zero translation delay and zero friction.
It definitely seems like the logical solution. But the third source in our stack, that the MCP dynamic stability model, delivers a massive counterintuitive warning about that exact approach. The model suggests that a perfectly synchronized system is essentially doomed to collapse.
Okay, I'm going to push back on that. Why would a communication system with zero friction and perfect understanding be doomed? I mean, isn't efficiency the ultimate goal?
Well, the MCP model studies systems theory, and it specifically looks at a phase it identifies as S3.5, chronic depolarization.
Chronic depolarization.
Yeah. And when an organization or a society attempts to eliminate all friction and operate at hyper-efficiency, it inadvertently destroys its own buffer zones. It removes the natural delays that occur during translation.
And why is that delay necessary?
Because without translation delay, every single input demands an immediate, frictionless output. The system completely loses its ability to rest, to absorb shocks, or to slowly evaluate information. It enters chronic depolarization.
Right.
The framework lists the symptoms of an S3.5 phase, and let me tell you, they sound chillingly familiar. It's constant reaction, hypersensitivity to microstimuli, local inflammation, and a total inability to recover from baseline stress.
Wait. Hypersensitivity to microstimuli and constant reaction. You are literally just describing modern social media.
Exactly. Or consider an exhausted corporate culture where every minor internal email is treated as a 5-alarm crisis requiring immediate action. Or a political climate where the slightest end-layer disagreement instantly escalates into an existential operational threat.
It's just exhausting.
Because when you remove the friction of translation, everything becomes highly conductive. A spark on one side of the system instantly sets fire to the other side.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It actually reminds me of engineering a suspension bridge.
Yeah, that's a good analogy.
Yeah, because if engineers design a massive bridge with absolute structural rigidity, like zero sway, zero play, in the cables, the very first time a strong gust of wind hits it,
Yeah.
the bridge won't bend. It'll just violently snap in half.
And the MCP model actually takes that bridge analogy a step further, because the sway of the bridge isn't just a passive defense against the wind. It is an active form of what they call fluctuation.
Fluctuation.
Okay. The model argues for liquid stability over fixed stability. True organizational health requires diversity of thought, margins of error, and yes, even noise. Those moments of slight mistranslation between the engineering department and the marketing department aren't necessarily a bug to be eradicated.
They're a feature.
They provide the necessary space for negotiation. They force people to slow down, clarify, and adapt.
So the friction is the shock absorber. We actually need a little bit of misunderstanding to keep the social structures from becoming brittle.
Exactly.
But if we need that friction to survive, how do we protect it in our current reality? Because we were living in an era where algorithmic feeds and AI tools are aggressively accelerating our translations. I mean, they're stripping away the buffer zones and forcing us to constantly react. How do we keep our societal bridge from snapping under the pressure?
Well, the sociologists behind the LMOS framework address this in their updated version, LMOS v 2.0. They define the specific danger of our era with a really striking phrase. They argue that today the speed of explanation outpaces the speed of digestion.
The speed of explanation outpaces the speed of digestion.
Wow.
So we are being handed synthesized answers much faster than our brains can actually process the underlying meaning.
Right, and the consequence of that speed is something they call a closure gradient. When we are fed instant, frictionless translations, we tend to accept them as fixed meaning. We force a premature conclusion just because it feels efficient.
We lose the liquid stability.
We become rigid. So to counter this, LMOS v 2.0 insists that organizations and individuals must actively build practices of cognitive cooling and reobservability.
Cognitive cooling. That sounds incredibly necessary right now. But what does reobservability actually look like in a practical day-to-day setting?
It's the deliberate choice to leave meaning slightly open, to step back from an interaction and not immediately force an operational conclusion. Structurally, it means preserving that human eye layer we discussed earlier.
Taking a breath.
Yeah, you allow yourself to say, I am observing this information or this end-layer narrative, but I do not need to instantly synchronize my worldview or my actions to it.
It's resisting the urge to fire off that instantaneous, emotionally charged reply on a forum. Or, in a business setting, it's refusing to instantly implement a massive AI-generated strategy document without spending a week deeply analyzing the actual operational reality it's going to hit.
Exactly. And the researchers make a really profound point here. They argue that in a high-speed technological society, true care is not just an emotion or a feeling of goodwill toward your fellow citizens. True care requires structural repolarization infrastructure.
Repolarization infrastructure, like building literal speed bumps into our systems.
Exactly that. It's a company instituting a policy where emails cannot be delivered on weekends, forcing a delay in the workflow.
Oh, I love that.
Right. Or it's a software team requiring a mandatory 24-hour human review period before an AI's code can be deployed to the live system. It's creating spaces where people and systems are granted the time to computationally cool down and reevaluate meaning before they are forced to act on it.
That reframes our entire relationship with artificial intelligence.
Right.
Because we've been collectively treating AI like an oracle. We type a prompt into the end layer, and we just expect the machine to spit out the final, perfectly translated, correct answer for us to immediately execute.
And if we accept the premise of these three frameworks that meaning constantly mutates across environments, and that perfect frictionless synchronization leads to collapse, then relying on an AI as an oracle is structurally dangerous.
Yeah.
We shouldn't view it as an execution tool. We should view it as an instrument.
An instrument for locating the shear in our own systems.
Yes. When an AI fails to execute a prompt correctly, or it produces a completely tone-deaf response to a sensitive organizational issue, our reaction shouldn't just be annoyance at a broken end layer output. We should use that failure to map the invisible translation layers. The AI's mistake is actively showing us where our unspoken human assumptions were carrying the weight. By utilizing AI to observe these tensions and gradients, rather than blindly executing its commands, we maintain the reobservability of our world. We allow our structures to cool down.
This has been a massive paradigm shift. Just looking back at the ground we've covered, it changes how I view communication entirely. I mean, we started with a TR-01 thesis, realizing that words don't just carry meaning, they are converted by the environments that receive them. The human environment processes empathy, while the institutional environment processes workflows.
And we saw how the LMOS model reveals that AI isn't necessarily creating new misunderstandings, but rather highlighting the structural gaps between our narratives and our operations. Gaps we used to just patch with human intuition.
Yeah. And perhaps the most surprising takeaway from the MCP model is that the friction caused by translation loss isn't actually the enemy. That slight mistranslation, the shear at the boundaries, is actually the necessary sway in the bridge. It's the fluctuation that keeps our organizations and our society from becoming hyper-reactive and snapping. We don't need perfect synchronization. We need cognitive cooling.
We really have to move away from trying to perfectly control our communication and instead learn how to structurally navigate its inevitable transformations.
So as you go through your week, I challenge you to look at your own interactions through this lens. The next time you are drafting a quick email to a colleague, or writing up a project brief, or even scrolling through a heated debate online, just pause for a moment. Step away from focusing purely on the vocabulary. Ask yourself, which operating system is actually receiving these words? What specific environment is going to execute this meaning?
Because the text is simply the vehicle. The destination environment dictates the reality that will be built. Which leaves us with a critical question to consider as we increasingly hand our communication over to digital algorithms and massive institutions. Well, how often do we actually notice the invisible translation systems operating just beneath the surface of our lives? And the next time someone looks you in the eye and tells you, I understand, what reality are they actually building?